Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It is so great to be here.
So today we're doing something a little bit different. Usually, we sit here and we look at supply chains or algorithms or these big geopolitical frameworks.
Right.
But today I have a stack of notes in front of me about a book that, on the surface, it really just looks like a collection of dirty jokes. We are doing a deep dive into The Bedwetter, Stories of Courage, Redemption, and Pee by Sarah Silverman.
Which is, to the uninitiated anyway, it looks like a completely standard celebrity memoir. You go into it expecting the childhood photos, the stories about dating Jimmy Kimmel, the behind-the-scenes gossip from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the book does contain all of that. But if you read it closely, and really look at the mechanics of what she's describing, it isn't a memoir at all.
It actually feels a lot more like a manual.
It is absolutely manual. We are not here today to review the jokes. We aren't here to decide if Sarah Silverman is funny, or if she's offensive, or even if she's a good person.
Because that is a moral conversation.
Exactly. And frankly, that is the conversation everyone else has been having about her for 20 years. We are here for a structural conversation. We are going to look at this text as a very precise case study of the American entertainment industry.
And specifically, the economy of stand-up comedy.
Correct. We need to define our primary system here right up front. We are looking at the mechanics of the reputational market.
Right.
What this book actually documents is how taboo and confession and what we might call this outsider identity, how these are not just personality quirks.
Right. They aren't just her being wacky.
No, they are economic assets. They are highly leveraged commodities within a very specific institutional architecture.
I think that is such a critical distinction for you listening to this, because usually when we see a comedian like Silverman, someone who is just known for being shocking, who talks about poop and racism and religion, we tend to think of them as this chaos agent.
Yeah, it's just someone throwing bombs for the sake of it.
Exactly. But reading this, you start to realize there is this incredibly rigorous logic to the chaos.
There is a deeply rigorous economic logic at play here. Today, we are going to trace how a human being is essentially converted into a brand. We are going to look at how shame, deep personal physical shame, is transmuted into professional capital.
And how media institutions like NBC and MTV and HarperCollins simultaneously punish and reward this exact kind of boundary testing.
Which is the core contradiction of the whole system.
So we really have a lot of ground to cover. We need to look at how this machine is built. And for Silverman, that construction phase starts way before she ever steps on a comedy club stage. It actually starts in a supermarket in New Hampshire.
The design phase.
The design phase, right. So the book opens with her childhood in Manchester, New Hampshire. And she paints this picture of a very specific family dynamic. Her father, Donald, he is this larger-than-life character.
He runs a discount clothing store called Crazy Sophie's Factory Outlet.
Which honestly is a lesson in branding all on its own.
It really is.
But the key moment, the absolute origin story of the system we're talking about, it happens when she is 3 years old, which is, a crucial age for behavioral development.
Most parents are teaching their kids words like cat and dog and please and thank you at that age.
But Donald decides to take a wildly different approach.
He is basically programming the initial software.
Yeah. He sits her down and he teaches her a very specific vocabulary list. He trains this 3-year-old to say, bitch, bastard, damn, shit.
Now we have to pause there. Because this isn't just a father being inappropriate for laughs. He is actively giving her tools. But tools are completely useless without an environment to deploy them in.
Right. So he takes her to the boys' market in Manchester. It is just your standard, everyday supermarket, fluorescent lights, people buying milk, very quiet, mundane atmosphere.
And he unleashes her.
He sets this tiny 3-year-old loose in the aisles.
And what exactly does she do?
She wanders around, this cute little toddler, just screaming at the top of her lungs, bitch, bastard, damn, shit.
Just imagine the scene for a second. You are a shopper. You are just trying to buy eggs. And suddenly, the basic social contract of a grocery store is violently ruptured by a toddler. The shock is immediate.
And the attention is absolute.
Yes.
She describes all these shoppers stopping dead in their tracks. They are totally horrified. They are staring at this child like she's possessed by a demon. But then, and this is really the most important part of the whole story, she looks back at her dad,
And what is the feedback loop she receives in that exact moment?
He is beaming at her. She says he stood by with this genuine pride, just beaming through a mask of mock surprise. He's pretending to be shocked for the sake of the other adults, but he is directly signaling pure approval to her.
So this is the initial system input. If we look at this strictly behaviorally, the father is teaching the toddler that shouting profanities isn't just naughty. It is actually a mechanism for market differentiation.
Wow, yeah.
In a supermarket full of quiet, polite people, the one person shouting bastard commands 100% of the market share of attention.
It is instant, undeniable visibility.
And it establishes a permanent reward mechanism. The public, who are represented by those strangers, they provide the shock. That shock is a form of energy. Then the authority figure, represented by the father, provides the praise.
So it installs this boundary testing algorithm right into her brain.
Very early on, she learns that if she violently violates a social norm, she gets love and validation from the person whose opinion matters the most to her.
She actually writes in the book, from that moment on, everything I did was in search of that rush. It is almost like he trained her to be a psychological shock trooper.
He absolutely did. It is early, intensive training in high-risk social arbitrage. Most children are trained to seek safety in conformity. Be quiet, fit in, don't make a scene.
Right.
She was trained to seek safety in transgression. That is a fundamental design feature of the comedic outsider.
But if that was the only thing that happened, I mean, she might have just become an annoying kid who swears a lot. There is a second layer to this design phase that is so much heavier, and it is actually the title of the book itself, The Bedwetter.
We truly cannot overstate the structural importance of this specific element.
It is not just a catchy, gross-out title for a comedy book. She wet the bed until she was 16 years old.
16.
Think about that. High school, driving age. She goes into so much detail about the pure logistics of managing this secret. It wasn't just an occasional accident. It was a nightly, inescapable reality.
The plastic sheets, the smell in the room.
The absolute terror of sleepovers.
The sleepover is the highest stakes social environment for a child.
Exactly. She talks about going to sleepaway camp, the sheer overwhelming panic of it. She had to manage this massive, humiliating secret while surrounded by her peers 24 hours a day.
Waking up before everyone else to secretly wash her sheets. Hiding the wet pajamas.
She calls it a daily shame.
So let us reframe that entirely through the lens of risk tolerance. In the economy of stand-up comedy, what is the primary barrier to entry? What keeps normal people, you and me, off that stage?
It is the fear of bombing, the fear of complete silence, everyone in the room looking at you and thinking you are an unfunny idiot. It is just the ultimate nightmare of public humiliation.
Exactly right. Social humiliation. Now, imagine you are a teenager who has spent every single morning for 16 years waking up in your own urine, completely terrified that your friends will find out and reject you.
Yeah.
That is a level of visceral, physical humiliation that most adults will never, ever experience.
She uses this incredible metaphor for it. She says that daily shame ground away at her psyche like glaciers against the coastline.
That is the key phrase. It calloused her. We're looking at structural callousing. She makes the argument that if you can survive the deep humiliation of waking up wet at a teenage sleepover, the humiliation of a silent audience at a comedy club is negligible. It is effectively zero.
So the trauma itself actually created an asset.
It created a nothing-to-lose asset class.
Yeah.
In purely financial terms, she developed an incredibly high-risk tolerance because her baseline for disaster was set so unbelievably high.
To be a successful boundary-pushing comedian, you need to be willing to walk into a room and risk total social rejection.
And the bedwetting inoculated her against that fear.
It is like she is walking out on stage wearing armor made out of her own shame.
Transmuted shame. It is no longer shame at that point. It has been processed into a shield.
There is another aspect of this outsider identity construction that comes up right at the very beginning of the book, literally in the foreword. And this is where we start to see her clashing with the publishing industry itself.
This is a perfect example of system design meeting system resistance.
So HarperCollins, her publisher, they obviously want a foreword for the book. The industry standard, the absolute rule for celebrity memoirs is that someone else reads that foreword. You get a famous friend, a mentor, an older comedian.
That is a mechanism called social proof.
Right.
The institution relies on this hierarchy. You need a stamp of approval from an established, trusted figure to validate the new product to the consumer. It essentially says, trust this new person because I, a person you already trust, am vouching for them.
But Silverman says no. She says, I want to write it myself. And she actually publishes the internal emails in the book. Her editor, David, writes to her and says, I really don't think it makes any sense for you to write it yourself. Stay Jewish, David.
Which is a very gentle, standard industry nudge to get back in line.
And she writes back to this major publishing executive, you are dumb and smell fartish.
You are dumb and smell fartish.
It is so childish, but when you look at it structurally, it is so deliberate.
What is she actually doing there? She is rejecting the promotional hierarchy outright. By writing a foreword praising herself, I think she calls herself a literary genius and talks about her big naturals, she is signaling to the market that she operates entirely outside the system of traditional social validation.
She actually calls it an autonomy brand. She self-validates.
And notice the language she uses, calling her editor fartish. She is reverting directly to the language of the toddler in the supermarket. She is proving to the reader, on page 1, that she is ungovernable.
That is the actual product she is selling.
Exactly. She is telling the consumer, I will not follow the rules, not even the rules of how to sell you this very book.
So that gives us the design phase. We have the inputs, the cursing father, the bedwetting trauma, all coming together to create this fearless, autonomous agent. Now we need to move to the second layer of our analysis, which is incentives, the economy of taboo and irony.
Because once this autonomous agent enters the broader market, things get incredibly complicated.
This is where we see the primary system really start churning. The market wants the edge she provides, but it fundamentally does not know how to handle it. We need to talk about the me play joke section of the book.
This is the famous Conan O'Brien appearance.
This is the infamous chink joke, and we really need to set the historical context here because this happened in 2001.
Right. Pre-social media, pre-Twitter, a vastly different media landscape.
So she is on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. It is a massive mainstream platform. And she tells this joke about trying to get out of jury duty.
Walk us through the exact mechanics of how she structured the joke.
The setup is that she wants to avoid jury duty. And she knows that if you seem wildly biased or prejudiced, the court will dismiss you. So she tells Conan that she wrote, I hate chinks on the official form.
A racial slur. Extremely high voltage language for network television.
But then comes the punchline. She says she looked at the form and thought, oh no, I don't want people to think I'm racist. So she erased it and changed it to, I love chinks.
Okay, let us disassemble this. Silverman argues the joke is purely satirical. She is adopting a persona, she calls it an ironic ignoramus.
Right.
The target of the mockery is not Asian people. The target is the sheer stupidity of someone who thinks that replacing the word hate with love somehow neutralizes a racial slur. It is a joke about semantic ignorance, not a joke about race.
She says the subtext is in direct contrast to the text. And on the night, Conan laughs. The studio audience laughs. The episode airs without issue. But then, enter Guy Aoki.
Who is the president of the Media Action Network for Asian Americans.
Yes, and he goes after her hard. He starts a massive media campaign against her.
And this creates a truly fascinating collision of institutional incentives. Let us map the players here. First, you have the activist, Guy Aoki. What is his structural incentive?
To protect his community, to identify racism in the media and stop it.
And structurally, his organization's validity and funding depend entirely on identifying and punishing the use of code words. He is incentivized to focus purely on the signal, the word chink, regardless of the content.
That makes sense.
If the word is used, the alarm must be rung. His system is not designed to process irony. It is designed to process vocabulary.
Then you have the second player, the network, NBC.
Right. Their incentive is purely risk management. They need to protect their advertisers at all costs. So even though they aired the show, even though their standards and practices department approved the booking and the joke, the moment there is organized pushback, they immediately apologize.
Silverman actually notes the deep hypocrisy here. She mentions that at the exact same time NBC is apologizing for her word choice, they are airing Fear Factor on prime time.
Oh, right. The yak intestines.
She explicitly points out that they have contestants eating maggot-filled rotting intestines of dead yaks on national television.
Because NBC is perfectly fine with the deep degradation of human dignity via yak intestines, because that degradation reliably sells ad space. It's considered safe gross-out material.
But they apologize for a satirical joke because it threatens the advertisers in a political dimension.
That is the cold institutional logic at work.
And then there is the third player, Sarah herself. What is her incentive? Because you would think, logically, she should just issue a PR apology and make the pain go away. That is the standard Hollywood playbook.
But in the reputational market of comedy, Controversy is liquidity. She explicitly notes in the book that this conflict raised her profile immensely.
Even negative attention is valuable.
Highly valuable in the fame economy. If she apologizes, she becomes compliant. She becomes a generic entity. If she fights, she reinforces that outsider brand we talked about.
But she brings up this concept during this section that I thought was just brilliant. She talks about the observer effect.
Yes, she borrows the principle from quantum physics.
She says that deconstructing comedy fundamentally ruins it. She uses this example where she says, if someone tells you, I really like the way you smile with your lip, you become instantly self-conscious and you can never smile naturally again.
Because the act of observation alters the state of the subject.
Exactly. And she feels that having to publicly explain the irony of her joke to Gaeoki completely ruins the joke. It strips all the magic and the timing away.
But here's the structural catch. The system forces deconstruction. In a mass media environment, the context, the late-night looseness, the ironic persona that is all stripped away, the buzzword travels alone.
The word gets separated from the performance.
Yes, Gaeoki reacts to the word in a vacuum, the network reacts to Aoki's press releases, and the comedian is left standing there trying to explain the nuances of quantum physics to an angry mob.
Which leads perfectly into the politically incorrect debacle. This is where we see the total market failure of irony play out in real time.
It is an absolute disaster, a perfect storm of mismatched systems.
So she agrees to go on Bill Maher's show, Politically Incorrect. She genuinely thinks she is going to have a nuanced intellectual debate with Gaeoki on television. She wants to explain the difference between text and subtext.
She thinks she is walking into a graduate seminar.
She even brings two friends for backup. Comedians Doug Benson and Brian Posehn.
Two stoner comics.
Yeah.
Not exactly a high-powered legal defense team.
No. And Gaeoki shows up with his own backup.
He brings the audience.
The producer actually pulls Sarah aside and tells her that Gaeoki requested extra seats. She asks how many. The producer says, 60. 60. Half the audience in that studio is there explicitly to support Gaeoki.
This is a hostile takeover of the environment. The system of a live TV debate show is not designed for nuance. It is designed to be a gladiator arena.
And Gaeoki understood the mechanics of that specific show way better than she did. He stacked the deck.
And how does it play out?
It goes terribly. Bill Maher asks her to repeat the joke. She does, and it completely bombs. 60 people instantly boo her. She tries to explain the irony. She says, that's objective, dude. But she is losing terribly. The intellectual defense just completely fails on live TV.
And this is the critical moment for her identity. When the intellectual defense fails, what does she do? Does she retreat? Does she cry? Does she apologize?
No. She reverts right back to the schoolyard. She points at Gaeoki and calls him a douchebag.
You're a douchebag, man.
It is so jarring to watch.
But this is the outsider reflex kicking in. When the system traps her in a corner, she breaks the rules of decorum. By calling him a name, she loses the formal debate, technically speaking. But she massively reinforces her brand as ungovernable.
She simply refuses to play by the rules of a debate that she knows she is losing.
It is incredibly messy. But structurally, it works for her career. It solidified her in the public consciousness as someone who will not back down under pressure.
Because it distinguishes her. In a world of these highly polished, PR-trained celebrities, the person who just calls her opponent a douchebag on national TV feels authentic.
And authenticity is the scarcest possible resource in Hollywood. She just manufactured a massive, highly visible supply of it.
Which brings us to part 3 of our deep dive. Outcomes, escalation, and authenticity branding. We've talked about how this brand is built and tested. Now let us look at how it operates day to day in Hollywood. Because despite all this fame she is acquiring, the industry keeps trying to force her into a tiny box.
There is a whole section of the book dedicated to this. She calls it, "To Not Be Suze."
Suze. It is the perfect archetype of the female role in studio comedy.
Define Suze for the listener.
She describes it so accurately. She says almost every script she gets sent has a character named Suze, or someone who is effectively Suze. Suze is the bitchy ex, or Suze is the cunty girlfriend, or she is the quirky best friend whose only narrative job is to tell the audience that the main male character is actually a great catch.
Suze has no interior life.
None. Suze is just a plot device to facilitate the man's journey.
This is what we call systemic slotting. The Hollywood machine functions like a factory. It demands standardized parts. It wants to take this highly unique, volatile asset, Sarah Silverman, and jam her into a low-value standardized container.
Because it is efficient for them.
It is highly efficient for the studios. but it aggressively destroys her market value.
And she rejects it entirely. She says, I am not playing Suze.
The outcome of this rejection is that she realizes she has to build her own proprietary platform. If the market will not sell the product you represent, you have to build a new market.
And that realization leads directly to her stand-up movie Jesus is Magic and eventually the Sarah Silverman program on Comedy Central.
She creates a bespoke vessel where she can be the lead, but crucially, not the romantic lead. She can be the core of the show.
She says her character on that show is less a cunt than a clueless, arrogant ignoramus in search of an identity.
Which is a highly proprietary asset. No one else in Hollywood can play that specific role. It forms a moat around her value.
But even when she builds her own platform, the clash between her brand and the broader Hollywood system still creates these massive accidental viral moments. We have to talk about the Emmy dress incident.
Oh, the Blue House.
The Blue House. So she is going to the Emmys. It is a huge night for her. And she decides to wear this incredibly loose royal blue dress. She thinks it is totally fine. She explicitly says she is a comfort is key person.
Which represents value system B, the comedy value system.
Right. But then she steps onto the red carpet, which is value system A.
The red carpet system values glamour, visual perfection, and above all, fitting in. It is a rigidly conformist system designed to celebrate the traditional star.
And she gets absolutely destroyed by it. She Googles herself the next day, and there are worse dress lists everywhere. People are saying she looks like a fat girl at a rent fair.
One review actually said she looked like a royal blue satin octopus swallowing Sarah Silverman.
Brutal. But look at the systemic analysis she provides of that moment. She writes, once you start getting sarcastic Google search results, irony has truly bled into all areas of modern American life.
She actually found a Best Cinderella's Ugly Stepsister award online.
By totally failing in System A, the fashion world, she succeeded massively in System B, the comedy world.
The failure generated new content. It became a whole chapter in her book. It became a reliable, funny anecdote on late-night talk shows. She literally converted the public shame of looking like a crazy blue house into cash.
It is that exact same alchemy again, turning shame into capital. If you cannot be beautiful by their standards, be incredibly funny about being ugly.
Precisely. It is a perfect conversion of assets.
But then we get to the Britney Spears incident, and this one really feels different. This doesn't feel like a fun, ironic clash of systems. This feels like the system actively chewing people up and spitting them out.
This represents the escalation outcome, and it deeply reveals the predatory nature of platform economics.
This is the 2007 MTV Video Music Awards. We have to remember the cultural context of 2007. This is absolute peak paparazzi culture, peak Perez Hilton. Britney Spears is going through a massive, highly visible public breakdown.
Shaved head, attacking cars with umbrellas, the whole tragic spectacle.
And FTV intentionally books her for a big comeback performance to open the show.
Which is a systemic setup from the very beginning.
And the performance is a total disaster. She is lethargic. She seems completely out of it. Her costume doesn't fit right. It is genuinely painful to watch.
And immediately after Britney leaves the stage, who does MTV send out to follow that?
Sarah Silverman.
To do her opening monologue.
And what does she do? She just destroys Britney. She makes these brutal jokes about Britney's kids, calling them the most adorable mistakes you will ever see. She says they are as cute as the hairless vagina they came out of.
Now, the public reaction to that was intensely vitriolic. The public hated Sarah for kicking Britney when she was so clearly down, it looked unimaginably cruel.
But Sarah reveals in the book that she didn't even see Britney's performance. She was backstage rehearsing her lines. She had absolutely no idea it was a disaster. She thought she was just doing a standard roast of a massive pop star who was about to crush a comeback routine.
But here is the critical detail that completely exposes the underlying system.
Yeah.
MTV explicitly told her not to rehearse those jokes.
Yes. She says MTV's producers instructed her not to recite her actual jokes during the network rehearsals.
Now, why would a massive television network do that? Why would they want a live, high-stakes broadcast to be a complete surprise to their own control room?
Because they wanted plausible deniability.
Exactly. They wanted the edge. They desperately wanted the controversy in the next day's headlines. But they did not want to be on the record as having approved the material.
So if the joke goes too far, which it absolutely did, the network can just throw their hands up and say, whoa, we had no idea she was going to say that.
The network, MTV, wants the viral moment. But the performer, Silverman, takes 100% of the reputational hit. It is a textbook risk transfer. The platform extracted the value, which is the buzz, and completely discarded the human cost. Sarah got death threats, and Brittany was humiliated.
She actually calls it MTV's evil genius. They want all the benefit of the controversy without any of the institutional responsibility.
And that right there is the defining characteristic of the modern media platform.
So we have seen the outcomes. You have to build your own platform to avoid being typecast as Sues, but when you play on the massive corporate stages like MTV, you can get severely burned by the exact same edge that made you famous in the first place.
Which leads us to part 4, persistence, institutional friction.
Because despite all of this trouble, she just keeps going. She gets her own show, the Sarah Silverman program on Comedy Central, and this creates an entirely new institutional battleground, standards and practices, S&P.
The regulatory layer. This is honestly my favorite part of the entire analysis.
She calls it a Nurembergian nightmare. She paints this vivid picture of just trying to navigate these totally arbitrary rules.
Because there is no mathematical algorithm for what is offensive.
Yeah.
It is just a few human beings sitting in a room with their own bizarre personal hangups.
The poop sound effect example captures this so perfectly. She says one censor explicitly told them regarding an audio cue, the sound of feces hitting a massage table is acceptable.
Only if...
Only if the sound suggests the feces are solid.
Right.
But if the sound implies a high liquid content, it is completely banned.
I want you to really think about the level of bureaucratic absurdity happening there. A human being with a corporate salary and a job title and a 401k sat in an office in Los Angeles and had to officially adjudicate the defensible ratio of fiber to water in a comedy sound effect.
It is insane. Solid is fine, liquid is obscene.
It is absurd, but structurally speaking, this friction is highly productive. It actively forces what we call creative persistence.
The Zach Braff story illustrates that dynamic perfectly.
Walk us through how that happened.
So the script for an episode called for Sarah's character to loudly belch a specific word, and the original word was rape.
Which, I mean, is obviously pushing the limit.
Standards and Practices comes back and says absolutely not. You cannot belch the word rape. That is a bridge way too far for the network.
So what is the response? Do they just cut the joke entirely and move on?
No. The writers huddle up. They drink a ton of coffee. They are absolutely determined to find a workaround. They realize they need a word that technically belches well, physically speaking, and also sounds perfectly retarded in that specific narrative context.
And they eventually land on Zach Braff.
Zach Braff. They belch the name of the actor from Scrubs.
And she argues in the book that it was actually significantly better than the original pitch. It was vastly more absurd. It was much more specific. The censorship actually forced the comedic system to mutate into something weirder and ultimately funnier.
So the friction of the bureaucracy actually improved the final product.
In this specific case, yes. The censorship created new forms of absurdity. If they had just been allowed to say the original word, it would have been merely offensive. Changing it to Zach Braff elevates it to surrealism.
But then you have to look at the environment that constantly produces this kind of stuff, the writer's room itself. She describes the culture of her show's writer's room, and it sounds completely feral.
It functions as an engine of regression.
They have a Pen 15 club. They draw swastikas on each other's foreheads while they work. They're constantly pulling their pants down.
Why do they do this? Is it just because they are fundamentally immature people?
Well, she addresses that. She says, the truth about all this phallic mischief is that it slows down the writing process. She openly admits it is wildly inefficient.
But I would argue it serves a vital production function. Who exactly is the target demographic for a network like Comedy Central?
She says their target is 14-year-old boys and stoners?
Exactly. To write effectively for an audience of 14-year-old boys, these adult writers must artificially induce a state of arrested development in themselves. You cannot write optimal fart jokes if you are operating in a state of high-minded, mature professionalism. The phallic mischief, the pants pulling, the constant chaos. It maintains the specific psychological frequency required to mass-produce the product.
So the chaos is not an accident. It is a necessary manufacturing condition.
It is, but it extracts a massive physical cost. She talks about Dan Sterling, her head writer.
Poor Dan. She says he is literally losing his hair from the stress. He relies heavily on sleeping pills. He walks around with a permanent look of agony on his face.
The system consumes the organizers to fuel the creatives. Dan is the designated adult in the room, and the room is specifically designed to kill adults.
It is like he is the concrete reactor containment wall, and all the other writers are the highly unstable uranium.
That is a perfect structural analogy.
This brings us to the final section of our analysis, part 5, interconnection. How does this highly specific comedy system plug into the much bigger systems of the world? We are talking about religion, race, and labor.
Let us start with the God and sex controversy.
This was the one episode of her show that actually caused a legitimate, real-world firestorm. Not the racism jokes, not the poop jokes, but this. Her character has a casual one-night stand with God.
And God is played by Tucker Smallwood, who is a black actor.
She points out that for 3 years on that show, they did heavy drug jokes, poop jokes, Holocaust jokes, blackface, and nobody really cared. But sleeping with God? She says people went apeshit.
Because this effectively maps the moral system of America.
Yeah.
It reveals the true hierarchy of offense. You can mock the Holocaust. You can wear blackface, ironically. You can celebrate drugs.
Yeah.
But the desanctification of the divine, specifically when it's combined with miscegenation and outright rejection, that triggers the absolute deepest systemic alarms in the culture.
Because she blows God off after they have sex. She literally ghosts the Almighty.
It is the ultimate systemic taboo. It crosses the religious line, the racial line, and the gender line all simultaneously. A mortal woman treating God like a regrettable casual hookup completely inverts the entire patriarchal structure of Western morality. It is simply too much data for the cultural system to process at once.
Then there is her interaction with the identity market. She has a whole chapter in the book simply titled Jew,
where she coldly analyzes her own demographic appeal.
She says she is beloved by Jewish audiences for two very specific reasons: her obsession with suffering and her obsession with GI tracts.
The GI tract of a Jew over age 23 is true melodrama.
Sudden mass exodus, long, arduous journeys.
But look at the underlying economics of what she is saying there. She fully accepts the modifier of Jewish comedian. She discusses Winona Ryder, who famously changed her last name from Horowitz. The logic being, if you stay Horowitz, you're a Jewish actress. If you're a writer, you are just an actress.
But Sarah completely leans into it.
That is identity marketing. She willfully accepts the limitation, acknowledging she will never be cast as the generic American sweetheart in exchange for a highly lucrative niche monopoly. She secures the absolute, unshakable loyalty of a specific demographic.
And finally, we see her interact directly with the labor system during the Hollywood writers' strike.
This is a remarkably rare moment where the outsider leverages their considerable power for institutional protection.
Because her writers weren't originally unionized. The set painters had a union, the actors had a union, but the writers on her show didn't, and she personally insisted they get unionized.
Even though that insistence directly cost her own production company money.
And then, when the strike actually happens, she respects the picket line, she shuts the whole show down.
This perfectly reveals the hidden tension between the artiste and the producer. The artiste just wants to be funny and break rules. The producer has to legally manage labor relations. By forcefully siding with the union, she proves that while her content is totally anarchic, her operation is deeply embedded in the traditional, protected labor structures of Hollywood.
She is not actually an anarchist. She is running a union shop.
That is the system working exactly as intended. The rigid structure of the union protects the stability required to reliably produce the chaos.
So we have looked at the design, the incentives, the outcomes, the persistence, and the interconnections of this whole machine. We have literally traced how a toddler screaming in a New Hampshire supermarket becomes a multi-million-dollar media empire. But I have to ask the big question. What is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis is fundamentally in where we locate the agency. We perceive the Bedwetter and Sarah Silverman's entire career as just a chaotic collection of gross-out stories, personal defensiveness, and edgy humor. We see a provocateur who is simply trying to be shocking for attention. But what is completely obscured is the rigorous economic logic of the comedy industry itself. We fail to see that the shock is a highly calculated currency exchange. Treating this memoir as purely a personal narrative completely hides how the massive institutions, MTV, NBC, Comedy Central, actively manufacture and heavily profit from these exact transgressions, all while publicly distancing themselves from the fallout. When viewed structurally, we see that the offensive comedian is not a glitch in the system. It is a feature, explicitly designed to test the elasticity of cultural norms for maximum profit. The crisis is believing the outrage is real, rather than seeing it as a function of the market's design.
That is a lot to process, but it makes perfect sense when you lay it out like that. The outrage is literally the fuel.
The outrage is the final product.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter, visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.